The following is a presentation of TalkersTV.
Yeah, I've been a professional broadcaster for 45 years. And I remember when I was a professional broadcaster for 8 months or 9 months, and I was receiving my paycheck every week of $1.15 an hour while I was going to college at Hofstra University, thinking, wow, I eventually will really be a professional in this business. I'm almost 1 year in it. And I can't really think of myself as a pro until I've done this for 1 year. And I remember when I reached that first year anniversary, I am a professional broadcaster. I think I was 19 years old at that time. And it struck me as like such an accomplishment. Now, 45 years have passed, and I don't know whether or not I should be proud of that or embarrassed to be a survivor, because the more things have changed, the more they stay the same. That was the keynote speech of Gordon McClendon, a great pioneer in our industry who I saw at one of my early conventions. The name of his speech was, "The more things change, the more they stay the same." And that is certainly what's happening now. And I think that the thing we must remember is, what are the things that are staying the same so that we don't throw the baby out with the bathwater as we rush into the hipness and the coolness and the inness of changing. These times are marked by radio going through the most extraordinary change in its entire history, which is almost a century. You think about that, we're talking about a medium that's about 100 years old. It's truly an old medium. And yet, it still has all the earmarks of new media. It's a fascinating medium, radio, in as much as it is on the cutting edge of all that is cool, all that is hip, all that is street, and has an impact when used properly that actually changes the course of human events and sets the stage for what's next. These days will be looked back as the excruciatingly painful, confusing, just completely unpredictable times when radio transitioned from the analog 20th century culture that it was a major institution at conveying and looking over at purveying, and evolving into this very strange, absolutely brand new culture of the digital age of the 21st century. That's these times. This is a transitional era. How long will this era exist? You never know until you're past it. You have to look back at it and you go, oh, it started around 1990, or it started in 1987 with the Communications Act, or it started in 2002 when Apple came up with a new device, or the smartphone, or whatever. But when you move forward and you look back, it'll probably turn out to be a 15 or 20 year period that we are in now, maybe even longer, in which radio went from the radio that everyone in this room grew up with, because we are all natives of the 20th century. Everybody in this room is a native of the 20th century if you put yourself into the mindset that time is also a place. We come from the 20th century. That doesn't mean we're not people, men and women of the 21st century. It just means that we're native. Our native land was the 20th century. Children that have been born in the last 13 years, certainly, or perhaps in the last 20 years or 23 years, they will be native to the 21st century. And the 20th century will be the old country that many of us thought our grandparents came from when they talked about the old country. Well, the old country in our life is the 20th century. 21st century is the new country. And they are as different as the old country on the other side of the Atlantic or the other side of the Pacific was to our grandparents, as this new country will be. Radio faces an absolute existential question at this point. Will it continue to exist? one of the big debates we have today is, what is the meaning of radio? What does radio mean? Is Pandora really radio? We hear that a lot. And people offer their suggestions as to what is radio. It was told to me, someone said, you should never use the term terrestrial radio in Talkers or RadioInfo because it marginalizes radio. AM, FM, call it that. And that's the only radio. If it isn't AM, FM, it's not radio. That's what I've been told by some people. And there's some truth to that. You laugh, Kipper, but there's some truth to it because, McLuhan, the medium is the message. What is the medium? Is the internet a medium? Is the internet a platform? Or do we have to create platforms with stationality on the internet to have a place to put that thing known as a box office? Do we have to create theaters so we have a box office? Or should we all just be street musicians talking about how many people have heard us and listened to us, but there's no box office? And that's the simplest way I can explain the question you always hear today of how do we monetize this digital universe that we're living in. We monetize it when we have business-to-business relationships, as we did in the old country of the 20th century, that define radio as a separate and individual iconic medium, as it was in the 20th century, where we can define it, and where we are able to have those platforms add their level of prestige to this product so that we can charge people to go inside, whether it's through advertising or subscriptions or whatever. It's that simple. So the digital era beckons. It is not going to go away. Will radio survive? Well, before I answer that, let me say that as one who's never attended a conclave and never spoken at a conclave, I've never spoken at an industry conference that said it's dedicated to learning. So therefore, I have to put my academic hat on and say something that is in the spirit of teaching. They even called us faculty members, as opposed to hucksters, hawkers, sellers, boosters. I've always seen conferences as places to share information about how to succeed, not necessarily to learn, but to mimic things that work, make connections, and sell things. We go to these things to sell things, even if it's to sell ourselves. When you network, you're selling yourself. But to learn, I feel I must be obligated to answer that question truthfully. And of course, with the ongoing gaze of the video that is recording this, and the fact that each and every one of you could be recording me secretly or not so secretly on your iPhones or your smartphones, I can't say anything to you here that I wouldn't want anyone else outside of this particular environment to hear or know. The walls between the intimacy of different events come down, and context gets lost in the process. So therefore, I very, very gingerly and carefully will tell you what I consider to be learning, as opposed to inspiring you, encouraging you, boostering you, selling you, hyping you on what I hope happens, even though there will be a lot of that in that, because that's what I do. But learning, will radio survive in the 21st century as we know it, as an industry that provides us with a place to do our shows, sell our stuff, have our connections have value that could be monetized, and also give us the self-actualization that we seek, which led us to go into this business originally? The answer is probably not. We face a very, very big challenge if we want to have our cake and eat it. And having our cake and eat it means to still have this wonderful, wonderful culture and this wonderful industry and this wonderful career and this wonderful art form still have those values and those elements in this new country. Because one of the things I've learned just in the last 45 years of being in this business is nothing is written in stone, nothing is inherently hip. These are all relative terms, and no art form and no culture is forever. There was once a time when people sat around and said, how will vaudeville survive? How could the world possibly get along without vaudeville? Right now, the people in the circus industry, how could people get along without the circus? Even theater is facing a crisis. Certainly, magazines and newspapers talk about a culture. Will there be magazines, books, newspapers in 25 years? Something that's been around for thousands of years? Or certainly hundreds of years? Probably not. As soon as we all die off, the next generations will probably look at books as tchotchkes, museum pieces, curiosities, the same way we look at hurricane lamps with candles and oil in them. Yeah, we understand what they are, they function, but we wouldn't think of, necessarily lighting our house with it. Which also frustrates me when I hear boosters of radio say, look, radio will always be around, we need it in hurricanes. We need it when the electricity goes out. What they're basically saying is radio is now marginalized to being the sterno of media. It's got to have more going for it than its utilization during hurricanes and crises and mass destruction, unless we step back and we say, okay, why do radio numbers and ratings and arbitrons and PPMs go up during these crises that we address? My answer to that is, well, let's have every day be a crisis. Let's address the pain and the suffering and the crisis and the anxiety and all of the hurricanes and the electricity that goes out on a broader definition. Let's look at the customer, our listeners, the world, and say, oh my gosh, look at all the pain, the suffering, the angst, the drama, the excitement, the needs of the human condition, and let's address them every day as if it's a hurricane, a tornado, a crisis. People are dying. Radio came to the aid. That seems just obvious to me. One of the problems with this new corporate era we're in is people are not sitting around trying to figure out new formats. We have this brain-dead mentality that the formats that exist now are the formats that are going to exist forever, that it's always like this is the way it's always going to be, and if we tell people that radio is more important than Pandora, maybe they'll believe us and they'll listen to this crappy product that we're putting out. Forgive me, I'm going to go back to my professorial teaching. So students, let's go back to the topic at hand. Is that my phone? Is that your phone, Art? Tell them to wait. Okay. Don't take your eye off that camera for 1 second. That's why you're here. God, the distractions and the attention deficit disorder of this era we live in are just absolutely scary. I don't know how there's any competence anymore, and this is not against Art, but he's still on the phone. He's not listening. He'll see. He won't watch it either, so it doesn't matter. I wonder how anything gets done that requires more than 5 minutes of concentration and a 6th grade education in today's world. Doesn't it scare you? Because when you talk to people, wherever you go, they're like all screwed up. They're we take words and we're shortening them. We don't know how to write anymore. And this is not some old fart saying I liked it better in the old days. Believe me, I like the new days better. But these are problems that are really causing a lot of trouble. I mean, if people are not concentrating, how is anything that requires concentration getting done properly? You know, and attention deficit disorder. Well, now we program our radio stations to attention deficit disorder. Don't say anything longer than 4 seconds. People hate talk. Don't talk about the music. Don't even tell them what you played. They already know. Just play the songs. Don't even listen to it while you're playing it. Do you know in the old days, when I was a program director, I used to tell my DJs, you should listen to the song while you're playing it. And they go, what? We've heard it 1,000 times, and we hate it. We want something new. No. Listen to the song every time you play it, and like it. Why? Because there's a metaphysical aspect to what we do. And that is, if you listen to the song while you're playing it, it'll sound better to the listener. I actually believed that. Now, it's probably not true, but I believed that. Because I am first and foremost, well, I've owned radio stations, I've run trade publications, I have done 25 careers of a normal human being in this industry, and I'm still going strong. But deep, deep, deep in my heart, just under being a program director, which is sort of the way I relate to the industry as an old-fashioned PD, deeper than that, I'm just a talent. I'm just an old rock and roll DJ who learned how to play rock and roll records back in the late 60s, because my first job in radio was playing Mantovani records on a beautiful music station, and segueing them was very important so that there was a flow to the sound of the station. And then I took that I learned in my teens on the air, and I applied it to Led Zeppelin and Bob Dylan records, and it worked out pretty well. So, as a talent, I'm going to approach the basics of the speech, and I'm about halfway through, and now I'm going to start the speech. I'm going to talk about radio in the digital age, which I've already established is here to stay, that the internet is no more a platform than the airwaves, and the air is a platform. Where you heard? I'm heard on the air. Oh, where do I find that? Where's my show? It's on the internet. Well, where do we find that? Everywhere. It's the air we breathe. One more remark about the internet, then I'll get into this. And if not, I'll write a column and I'll send it to you. The internet is not changing radio. People ask me, what effect will the internet have on radio? Radio is small potatoes. Radio is a pimple on the buttocks of the internet. Not even a pimple. It's not even it's a pale blue dot. The internet is changing our species. We're going through a period now that, talk about historically, is an anthropological change. This is a biological, anthropological, theological change. Radio? It's like a tsunami, blow down a building, a tornado, the building's gone. It's nothing compared to what's going on. The internet is changing the way we're wired as a species and how we communicate, because we're becoming, here's the best way I can describe it. We Homo sapiens are on the tail end of our Homo sapienshood, and we're becoming Homo technicus, Homo technos. We're becoming very machine-oriented, which is really what makes us human. We're the tool-making animal, and now we're going to the next level of our evolution, and the internet is the catalyst for that. But we are also becoming, and this is something for you to take note of with the that I described before, we're becoming a technologically induced telepathic species. Now, the whole basis of mass media was that we're not telepathic and that we have to send messages to each other over distances and time. Distance and time, 20th century and earlier. Instantaneous, there, 21st century. artificially induced, technologically enhanced, completely telepathic. Therefore, we're on the verge of things that are going to make the present early 20th century. You know, we're in the Model T Ford segment of the 21st century, seem archaic. There'll be no tools. There'll be none of these. Remember, you heard it first, right here. And you didn't really hear it first here, but I'm going to say it. It'll all be in our heads. The chips will be in our brains. There'll be none of this. There'll be just people twitching. What's the matter? I just got a message from my father. Did you hear what was on the radio? Yeah. People are getting messages from each other all over, left and right, coming in, not only coming into every orifice of their body, but coming from inside their body. They're not going to be looking, where can I buy a radio? There might be a hurricane. So the thing that I would teach anybody back to learning is, as a talent, I've established deep in my heart, I'm an old rock and roll DJ who was a kid that wanted to be an actor. I didn't become an actor because nobody told me how. They taught me how to act. They taught me how to put on a play. They taught me how to have a huge ego so I could be a big man on campus because I was playing the lead in the college plays. They taught me all of that, but when I asked the professors, so how do we make the leap from being a college actor to being on Broadway or being in the movies, each and every one of them, and I must have asked 20, 30 of my sage mentors and advisors, they all looked at me blankly. Like, I don't know. If I wanted to be a doctor, how do I become a doctor? Well, you do this, you go to the school, you do it, you apply for that, you get the scores, you get accepted, you do this, you serve an internship, you get a job at a hospital, now you're a doctor. You want to be a lawyer, you become a lawyer. But you want to be in show business, you want to be in radio, you want to be in theater, you want to be in movies, you want to have a television career, you want to be in politics, you want to be in any of these fields that we call professions, but they're not really professions. They're professional because you get paid. Back to my first year, I'm a professional. I'm a real DJ, just like Cousin Brucey. They couldn't answer it. So I was afraid to take that leap. So along the way, as a kid that loved radio but never thought I'd be in it, never wanted to be in it, I used to do charts of my own when I was 8 years old and compare one radio station's top 40 charts to the others. I knew all the rock and roll. I had every record. I knew all the DJs. I used to listen to radio under my pillow as a transistor. I never did that, actually. I just listened to it openly on the stairs. I remember with my old Philco, and I'd pick up Cincinnati and think it was really cool on Long Island, like magic. The static even made it more exciting. Quick side story. I did one of the first satellite syndicated radio shows with DIR Broadcasting, where I'm on the West Coast at KMET, and some fellows are on the East Coast at WNAW-FM, I can't remember all the names, and we had two guests in places we're talking to each other, and it was called Satellite Live, something to that effect. And we did the show, and we sounded like we're in the same studio, and we didn't get emails or faxes because they didn't exist in those days, but we got a couple of letters, remember those? And a couple of calls from listeners saying, it was great, but why are you making a deal about the satellite? We couldn't hear the satellite. Where was the satellite? It just sounded like a conversation. I learned so much from that. First of all, after that, every show that was ever on satellite, they had to put sounds in so that you got the feeling that this is coming from a satellite, and thus was modern and hip and cool, and you're getting something really special, because the satellite actually took away the magic of the static. It's coming in from Cincinnati. Oh my God, I'm cheating. I'm finding that I can actually hear these radio stations from outside my town. The static made it more interesting. So sometimes the advancement in technology takes away from the magic, and the magic is what gives it the show business. And you take away the show business, you take away the platform, you take away the money. this is part of what we're dealing with. So I didn't have anybody to tell me how to get into theater, so I didn't do it. I wound up getting into radio because I had a job as a department store announcer during the first summer between high school and college, and the fellow that worked at the pharmacy was a part-time newsman at a local radio station on Long Island. He said, "Son, you got a hell of a set of pipes there. You should be in radio." I said, "Yeah, but I didn't go to radio school. I don't know anything about, I'm a listener, I love radio, but I don't have any education. I don't know how to do this." He said, "They'll hire you if you can breathe in some of these places." And that was my first, I'm not going to tell you the whole story about how I wound up within 6 months being on the radio, becoming a program director and winding up in New York radio on a big radio station, all within 2.5 years. Because that's a cool story, but not for now. But I learned 2 big lessons. One, radio is very accessible to get into in those days for a young person if you want to. And 2, you would be famous and starve. That even back then, most people in radio were not making money, and that was the dirty little secret. I mean, I was on the radio on Long Island, and I had no money. I was making $1.15 an hour, $1.15 an hour. The kids that were working in the supermarkets packing bags and at the movie theaters being ushers, back when movie theaters still had ushers, which was a job I had before this, were making $1.25 an hour, or $1.35 an hour, and I'm on radio being heard all around Long Island playing Manavani records and trying to sound very old. And I was making $1.15 an hour, and that was sort of a dirty little secret because you don't want people to know that you're now on radio. It's magic. You're broken through the barrier. You're in the behind the box office. You're playing violin at Lincoln Center now, not on the street in front of Lincoln Center. And that was it for me. I never went anywhere else. But nobody ever told me what to do. And I have tried to always, as a publisher of trades, teach anybody who comes to me, how do you do this? How do you make a living in this? How do you get a job? How do you promote yourself? And that goes on today. So, in the spirit of learning, I do believe that radio has a future only if we create it. And as for what the definition of radio is, we do not have a monopoly on the word radio in radio. Marconi did not play records. He did not do the news. He didn't do promotions. He didn't have PPMs. Taxi cab drivers were not doing radio shows when they called in the dispatch. Radio is a medium. It's a technology. There are lots of different kinds of radio. The kind of radio that we're talking about, AM and FM radio, that's now trying to figure out what the heck it does on the internet, how it maintains its culture, how it maintains its positioning, I define as follows. It's an audio presentation, because remember, once we stop doing audio, we're not radio anymore, we're television. It can have all kinds of close relationships with other media because that's the nature of the 21st century, but it's an audio presentation, and here's the part that I think is important, that is greater than the sum of its elements. That the presentation is greater than the sum of its elements. If it's just to be defined by its elements, well, Tower Records should have been a radio station. Or Muzak, back in the elevator music. If something just presents in a utilitarian way, here's what we give you, and it's not greater than the sum of its elements, it will not be radio as we have known it in the old country, in the new country. And this is crucial to understand. It has nothing to do with AM, FM, or internet. It has to do with, are you creating something that's greater than the sum of its parts? Does it have magic? Does it have specialness? Does it touch the human condition? Now for the speech, 5 minutes. The number one problem threatening the survival of FM, AM radio as we know it, debt. Most radio stations that are under the big corporate banners, and these are not evil people, there's no evil empires, these are good people, these are smart people, but they're caught in a situation that has happened because of a process that has taken years. Most of the great radio stations are smothered in absolutely obscene levels of debt that are taking away radio's ability to do radio. As a trade publisher, it pains me to see not only my trades, but the other trades obsessed with corporate stuff. You would think that radio people walk around all day thinking about this deal, that deal, how much money is being spent, who the new corporate this is and the corporate that is. And used to be that talent and formats and programming and the relationship with the culture was what the people in our industry were concerned about. Because that is what gives it its forward motion. But debt is destroying this business, killing that entity we know as the radio station, which means the platform, the theater, the emporium, the cathedral of the culture. The place where you're part of a team, where you fit into a show, where your show fits into a continuum of shows, and that cathedral has a message and has an understanding about it by its public of what it represents. The other things, obviously, I mentioned, generational cultural shifts. Today, young people are not listening to radio. It doesn't have the same meaning to them it did when we were young people, which doesn't bode well for the future. And I don't know how we'll get around that, other than please don't throw the upper demos out. Don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. A lot of people who are 60 years old today may survive the very corporations that own radio that are saying the old people are no longer valuable. They have the money, they're going to be around for decades to come, they're very hip, they are very, very plugged in, but most importantly, they love radio and know how to use it. Super serve your fans, super serve the people that know how to utilize the medium. Exotic new media competition, which I don't have to explain further. Audience measurement shortcomings. It's very difficult in this wired, precise, fact-oriented age to rate radio accurately. PPM or not, Arbitron, they do a great job considering what they have to work with. But the truth is, the radio industry cannot afford what it would cost with present-day technology to accurately rate radio. There's so much wiggle room in it because they can't afford to. I had somebody come up to me, we had a fellow from Arbitron speak at one of our conferences, and he said, if you gave me enough money, I could rate radio, I could show you how. And I said, if you gave enough money, if you gave anybody in research enough money, they could do it accurately, but where's this money going to come from? You know, Arbitron does not have an endless supply of PPMs and people, and it just can't be done right now. So audience measurement is a huge problem in terms of sales. And commercial placement. The commercial is the biggest problem facing the existence of commercial radio. The actual commercial itself. These 8-minute commercial breaks are PPM pits of purgatory. They are absolutely devastating, and we're in denial about that for the most part. We worry so much, oh, we can't play that song, it was made 1969, not 1970, we'll lose our audience. And then the same programmer or corporate executive will turn a deaf ear to 8 minutes of crappy commercials. We can't have that kind of thinking. So those are the problems threatening it. Talent, if we don't have talent as the star of our medium, if we don't have talent as the star of our medium, we won't have a medium, we'll just be another utilitarian audio service. And talent must learn intellectual property. Intellectual property law is a very, very important thing that's going to define most talent negotiations in the future. So I definitely think that that's an important point. The other thing that talent must recognize, since, as I said, talent is king, and we should always look at talent as the building block of this industry, talent must start to think of itself as an entrepreneur. The idea that I'll get a job at a radio station, I'll work for one of these companies, and I'll be able to have a 20-year, 30-year career there, and they'll treat me very well, and I'll have a contract, and they'll worry about my future, out the window. The antidote to that, though, is that talent can start its own media station, and I believe the radio station of the present and the future, and the future, of course, is bigger than the present because it's unknown and it's got a lot of unclaimed territory in it if we're to look at it geographically. The media station is the platform of the future. The media station is audio, radio, video, television, graphics, photography, news in text form, newspapers, glitzy news in colorful text form, magazines, all in one. If I were a well-known radio talent who's being jerked around by corporate management today, as so many are, where I knew my sponsors and I knew my audience and I was famous in Peoria or Springfield or Milwaukee or Fresno or any of the hundreds of markets in our country, I'd go right to the local newspaper, which is desperate for help. I would go especially to the local weeklies who are inheriting the earth and the advertisers, and I would offer to do my radio show on the platform of their websites. That is a great idea. That's the best idea you've heard today, although you haven't heard too many today. The human element is the final thing that we have to remember, and then I'll be off the stage, because there's nothing worse than it starting late and then the keynote speaker going forever. What a horrible day you would have. I've had many of those. I will spare you. I'll be off this stage in about 120 seconds. Human-to-human communication must prevail. If you don't, and it goes back to the sterno of media, it goes back to serve crisis, serve pain, look around you, don't think categorically, don't think of people as numbers, don't buy that. Touch people, touch them. Radio is one of the most effective ways of people connecting with each other. And that is something, hopefully, that will exist not only in the 21st century, but in whether we're Homo sapiens or Homo technos or whatever we evolve into, that we still will be obsessed with being part of a collective, part of a group, part of a culture, part of a nation, part of a world, part of a species. We crave human connection, human contact. We have that power. We have that power with this medium to do it because it's so easy to do now. It's so accessible. You can do it from your home. You could do it from your basement. Or you can do it on some of the big call letters that still exist because they haven't yet been destroyed by the trends and the forces that threaten to destroy them. They will not pop up again on the internet in the same form they are now because the internet is like an ocean. And you don't want to go out on that ocean in a rowboat without a little engine and without a direction. You don't want to be caught in the middle of the ocean and not be in the shipping lanes, because there's going to be no ship that's going to go by to help you for days, weeks, months, years, or ever. You want to stay in the shipping lanes of human interaction, of business-to-business relationships, of institutionalized practices, of common language, of standard procedures. This is the culture that creates industries. This is the culture that creates artistic scenes. That's what we have to do. The internet is a void. It's outer space. It's the air we broadcast through. It's not enough. It's not enough. We have to stop our preoccupation with being liked on Facebook and start doing things that make us likable. Thank you.
Michael Harrison, will you take a couple questions?
If there's time, I'm trying to stay within your time frame.
I understand, but we're okay.
So I shortened this by 4 hours.
I've got about 3 minutes for questions, guys. Any questions? What? Yes. I'm going to run over here. I feel like Monty Lang. How do I look? Pretty good. Why, thank you. Just like Monty.
Hi. I'm an assistant professor, so I teach students how to be in radio broadcasting. And frequently I have guest speakers come into class, and they're often just incredibly cynical about the way that the industry is and the chances of students getting jobs and all that kind of stuff. And I was wondering, in your opinion, how do I combat that and make them excited to go into the industry but still couch it with the realization that they'll probably have to move around and do all those kinds of things?
Well, you just answered it, and that basically...
I'm very bright.
That was
so.
you are. That was the heart of what I was trying to address. That in the spirit of learning, I have to tell you it's terribly dangerous and that we are in danger of extinction. We are in danger of extinction as an industry. We're not in danger of extinction as there being radio or communications or other things to replace it. But we as an industry are in danger of extinction, so you have to encourage them to save the industry. And I gave you the key. The key is talent as entrepreneur. Tell them there's two reasons why people go into any of the arts. One is they just want to play in the game. They don't really have anything to say. They want to play in the game. Why do you draw? I enjoy it. It's therapeutic. Why do you sing? I love to sing. It makes me feel good. Why do you want to be on radio? I love radio. I want to be part of it. I'll change my name. I'll do the format. I'll do anything. Or they come to the medium because they have something deep inside them that they want to share. They want to serve a cause. They want to serve the forward momentum of humanity as they see it. Have them decide which of those two things they want, and then teach them about the entrepreneurship of serving those niches and those needs on the internet. And they can have a career that is the next level of the 20th century radio form. The people that are coming to you and are cynical and not offering hope or advice are victims of these changes, but they're not stepping out of it to look forward. And even though they're telling a half-truth, they're also telling a half-lie.
Any other questions? Oh, here I go. Thanks, Mark.
Next time, have two people in the audience.
I will have
with microphones.
You know, you'd mentioned things aren't going to be the same as they were before. We're from a small market radio station, and I think the claim to fame is that we do local and that we have personalities that people can relate to and make that connection to. And it seems like in bigger markets, and a lot of what I'm hearing is that that's been lost in a lot of corporate radio. Could some of the future be in the past as far as making that connection with people and being more local? Is that going to be enough?
Nothing will be enough. We'll always have to keep increasing service, but I think you hit the nail on the head that local is very important, and be proud of and preserve your localness. Local is a critical part of what radio is about. And why? Because communities, cities, need to have an identity. That people need to be proud of the town they're in. Look at the success of professional sports that plays into that so beautifully. People need to, and what was a way in the 20th century that people were able to get that pride in their community? The local radio station. The local radio station has always been a beacon of the, like the Chamber of Commerce, the pride in this, you know, we're New York, or we're Peoria. Doesn't matter. Play to the pride that that community has, and they will pay you back with loyalty. Because there's a yearning on the part of our municipalities and our regions and our cities in having that local identity and being proud of it, like they get through sports or they get through other things. I want to say one thing quickly, Bob. This is, there's so many things flying through my head during an organic presentation like this, where half of it is prepared and half of it is just looking at the faces and seeing whom I'm talking to so I can say something that'll have meaning to you. Music radio must survive for talk radio to survive. That's why I became involved in RadioInfo and made it the music radio trade publication. But music radio is a tough nut to crack right now. It's very, very difficult in music radio. It's harder in music radio than talk radio to be successful these days. For music radio to survive, and we pray it does, we have to bring back the disc jockey. We have to take ownership of the music culture. The reason that music radio even has to ask the question of, are we radio or is Pandora radio, is because it gave up ownership of the music culture by giving up respect for the disc jockey, the presenter of the music. This is crucial. If I just told you this, it's all you need. And you can learn from talk radio what ownership means. News talk radio over the last 25 years took ownership of the political culture. Sports talk radio over the last 25 years has taken ownership of the sports culture. Music radio has given up its ownership of the music culture, and as a result, that's why it's in its present state.
Ladies and gentlemen, Michael Harrison. Michael, thank you.